greeting you on this afternoon of January 24th, 1983. I have a lovely surprise for you. A very fine gentleman is going to speak to you right now.
The very fine gentleman is Robert A. McNabb, known to many as Bob McNabb. And I'm going to speak of my memories of the Millbrook Inn. In September of 1926, I arrived at Millbrook Inn after working in Boston, Cape Cod, Rye Beach, New Hampshire, Old Orchard Beach, Maine, and Kennebunkport, Maine, all in the same year. In those days, I was working a lot of hotels and restaurants and speakeasies. In arriving at the inn, I immediately fell in love with the place. And of course with a lovely girl whom I married in 1927. We will soon celebrate our 56th wedding anniversary. Upon arriving at the Millbrook Inn, this is what I found. A very quaint country inn of 57 rooms, many with a private bath. There were large porches where guests could relax and watch the little traffic passing by, or the Aberdeen Angus steers grazing in Oakley Thorns meadow across the road. The main entrance to the inn was an impressive lobby. Off the lobby were a beautiful drawing room, a writing room, a library, a games room, and of course the dining room, which seated about 100 guests. There was also a large dining porch. All of these rooms and many of the bedroom suites had large fireplaces, which were used in the spring and the fall. The other rooms on the main floor were a private dining room, a pantry, kitchen, chauffeur's dining room, and help's dining room, and a bakery room. Connected to the inn by a covered breezeway was the annex. This building was moved years later to its present location in front of the barn. There were several outbuildings, including the help's quarters, gardener's quarters, carriage sheds, chicken house, and a large barn with room for 16 horses. The barn had a pulley elevator to the second floor, where there were several rooms for chauffeurs, coachmen, or grooms. There was a large old coach still there when I came to the inn. I presume it had been used in the old days to meet guests at the railroad station. But in 1926, a Model T Ford station wagon was used for that purpose. Getting back to the main building and the annex, there were some beautiful old mirrors in the public rooms. The most important thing that I remember was the marvelous hand-carved woodwork in the staircases, which had been done by a local resident of that era. The dining room at the inn was the scene of many a merry dinner party. I remember a number of gala affairs given before the Millbrook Hunt Ball. There was no bar then at the inn, and no sign of drinking at the parties, it being during Prohibition. There was plenty of drinking just the same, although not nearly as much as there is today. Most people then kept their liquor in their automobiles or their hip flasks. However, Millbrook had an ample supply of liquor during Prohibition days. It was available in 17 places, such as private homes, barbershops, pool rooms, and restaurants. In those days, they were drinking wine, home-brewed beer, Applejack. All that could be obtained tax-free, of course. There were many distinguished guests at the Inn at that time. I remember Governor James M. Curley of Massachusetts, who stayed at the Inn when he visited his daughter, Mary, then a student at Bennett School. He was also a great friend of Franklin Roosevelt. I also remember Raymond Massey at the Inn when he was with Charles Rand Kennedy and Edith Wayne Matheson. Everything went along fine until the stock market crashed in 1929. Then the first thing affected was luxuries, and the Millbrook Inn was a luxury. The Millbrook Inn was operated at a loss for the rest of the E.W. Banker management until 1934. In that year, I was working near Cape Cod again. I did return to the inn for a few months in 1935, and I found rooms which were $13 a day, American plan, renting for $1 a day, European plan then. Of course, we were in a depression in 1935. There was another change in management in 1936. I think it operated only that season. During the lean years, the Millbrook Theater Group stayed at the Inn at reduced rates. Many of these actors and actresses were offered movie contracts and went on to stardom in the movies, the theater, and on the radio. Of these talented people, I remember Lanny Ross, Mary Astor, Warren Williams, Celeste Holmes, Betty Furness, Margaret Sullivan, Patricia Collins, Richard Skinner. Mrs. Robbins, Miss Lamont's sister, purchased the inn and sold the equipment at an auction in 1937. I bid on, and still have, an old panorama photo of the inn. Mrs. Robbins intended to have the inn torn down and a smaller place built for herself on the site. Unfortunately, she passed away with a heart attack before she could carry out her plans. George Whalen took over the property, and also in 1937 he had Al Pyers, Jim Lenahan, and others tear down the inn. The barn and the annex were left standing and are now owned by Reardon Briggs. The chauffeur's dining room was moved to Wilson Howe's property on Route 44 and made into a cottage. The carriage sheds are still standing, and if the inn were there now, it would most likely be an apartment house, as it was well built. Only a few of the lovely old trees are still standing on the lawn. That is all that is left of the inn today. Nevertheless, the memory of the quaint country inn, with all its charm, will always remain vividly in my mind.